Hello and welcome everyone to this GM Roundtable workshop. We are starting it off with session one, which is Intro to GMing, and the theme for this session is taking our first steps into running a session, whether it is session of D&D or Pathfinder or PBTA systems. We're going to be chatting today with a group of vastly experienced and amazing game masters, and they will share their experiences, what motivates them to run games, and what they've learned on their journey so far. So, without any further delay, let me start with a quick introduction of the panel here. We have Maitri, who is is a player in our Blades of Yanta campaign, which you should definitely check out, and is also a content creator on YouTube for various RPGs, system agnostic. We have Nico. Nico is a vastly experienced DM. Nico runs RPGs in conventions, which is something that I really want to pick their brain on. We have the pro GMs here, is Friday and Shubham, who have converted being a DM into a profession, into their regular day job, which is something that I really aspire to at some point in my life. And lastly, we have Vivek. If you all know Vivek from the server, Vivek is the most ardent advocate for all kinds of RPGs. Vivek has played, I think, over 50 RPG systems. I don't even think I can count that high the system that I know. So welcome all. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being a part of this session. And yeah, I'm going to just throw it to you people there. I mean, nobody's coming here to listen to me. So Shubham, let's start with you.
Yes.
I'm going to just ask you your, like what drives you to run sessions? Like what made you switch from being just a player to, taking charge and saying that, I want to run a session. I want to, like that's usually the biggest stumbling block for people, right? Like that.
The first reason I ever started is because I think it's the same reason why a lot of people often land up being a GM is because I had a bunch of friends and I was the only one who had played any TTRPG before. So it fell to me to kind of like introduce the rest of them to the game, to the hobby. Of course, once I did it and like I had a few runs, it took me like 2-3 tries before I warmed up to the whole process. Then I fell in love with it. And now I don't really particularly like being a player because my brain prefers to be on behind the screen, essentially, kind of constantly conniving in some way or the other to find the best way to engage my players and kind of challenge them and make them feel rewarded for what they're going through. So yeah, that's I stumbled into it, I think, like the way many do.
Nico, is that constant drive like there for you? Like you want to know all the information, you want to be there behind the screen. Is that
it's kind of a mix. It's a little bit of that and a little bit of like being like, oh, I have this idea and I want to run through this. Like my first ever real attempt from shifting properly from player to GM was in a club, and I kind of went, I have this idea and I'd love to see it at a table. And the GMs there were like, then run it. And I was like, oh, I can do that. That's a thing that I'm allowed to do, is just run my own game. And so I kind of started planning it and putting it together. And like, I was lucky. They helped me find players. They helped me by giving me the platform in the club by like announcing the game and stuff. So I didn't have to go super like in-depth searching for players, but like that's very helpful.
That's very interesting. You need like some sort of backing or some sort of push. What about you, Maitri? Like, what is your take, like when you first started GMing, what was that spark that inspired you to
My experience is actually very similar to Shubham's and probably like very similar to a lot of people, which is that I just really wanted to play and like I couldn't find anyone to run any games for me. So I was like, screw this, I'm just gonna do it myself. And I kind of just decided to give it a shot one day, and I ended up just like falling in love with it. And so I started GMing. It felt like out of necessity because it was like that was the only way I could get any games going was if I was running them. But since then, it's evolved into something I really, really love. Like I like playing, but I love GMing.
And speaking of, it's Friday. I would love to hear your take on this. You've gone from GMing for fun as a hobby to then converting it into a profession. You run. I've seen you. You're on social media. You're constantly like running games like throughout the week. How did that transition happen? Like, how did you step into GMing and then like converting it into a pro?
So cool. I started out actually just playing D&D pretty casually online during COVID, and then I saw that there was an invitation for a casting call, so I got on a show, and then I became a producer for the channel, and then I started running my own show, DMing, and then I put together some shows, and I put some shows on Kobold Press, working with Dot, and then at that point I was kind of like, well, I'm not making any money because there's no actual money in broadcasting, especially when you're small. And I had all these other opportunities, like working with the We're Not Strahd team as their marketing rep. And I sort of like, well, I might as well just get paid for like working at tabletop now. So I started just posting 1 or 2 games a week. And then I was still working a full-time job. And I eventually, so this is the wrong thing to do. I quit my job as soon as I made as much as my full-time job at Pro GMing. Don't do that. Save up first. But that's what I did. And at the time, I was also had the immense pleasure of working with Jasmine Bular as a content manager for her. And I think a lot of it was just like kind of a whirlwind of, just sending an email and not thinking that anybody was going to respond. And then they did. And then, things happened. So I think for the most part, my transition was just like a need for me to do what I wanted to do with my career rather than just picking any old job because I was coming out of the military and I didn't want to just have a career I cared nothing about.
We're all major fans of Jasmine here on the server. We love
She's great. I love Jasmine. She's wonderful to work for.
Vivek? I know you probably like more than me for sure. You dabble in all kinds of systems. How hard is it for you to like say that I want to run this system, I want to run that system? You keep like, how hard is it to shift between system to systems?
Well, I mean, so just to like start off with like, your initial starting point about what drew me to GMing, I think one of the reasons why I started GMing was I felt that it was the only way I could get to play the games that I want to play because, like others, I was in a position where I have to GM so I can facilitate something to happen. But then increasingly I found people around me were running games I wasn't interested in. And that's why I liked GMing because then I could say, right, we're going to play masks, we're going to play this and, set the stage that way. And then increasingly I was curious about different kinds of stories. And for me, I was exploring many different systems because I wanted to explore the different kinds of stories I could tell with them. And that led me down, several different rabbit holes. Like there was one time when I was basically going through a PBTA system every 2 weeks with like a group of friends and stuff. And, it is tricky. There are some things that can be a huge gear change. And there have been times when I've just been really in a massive PBTA rhythm, and then switching back to something like D&D was really hard. There was a phase I was going through when I was running a lot of like D&D and like Fantasy Flight Genesis and stuff, and then switching to something GM-less and narrative like Remember Tomorrow proved challenging. And it can get difficult when you're used to a particular rhythm and you need to warm up to something else again. But I think the more you give yourself time and space to immerse yourself in a different system, understand the basic principles that motivate its design, the better you get at making that gear change. But also you learn to predict yourself much better. So I know, for example, when I pick up a system, which kinds of rules I need to remember and which ones I can just look up on the fly whilst playing and which ones my players can help me with. And the more you practice, the easier it gets to juggle different kinds of games.
Yeah, I mean, I hear all that, and this I'm going to like throw it open to the floor, like whoever wants to. What I get from all of you is yes. After a while, it gets easier. I mean, it just like runs like clockwork. But like when you take that first step, right, it is very intimidating. You have, I mean, I'm going the most popular is D&D, so let's just take D&D. You have like a system of rules. You have so much information out there. You have actual plays. How do you get past that mental block of, like, I want to run a system, I want to run this game, I want to have fun?
Sorry, go for it, Friday, please.
I would say that, especially when you're new and like, even if you're with a new group, you're not going to be, the bee's knees, and it's okay, but you should understand you're the best GM at your table because you're the one like doing it. So I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself. I would instead focus on the things you can control. Like, did you prepare a little bit? Did you, get yourself what you needed to feel confident? And that's going to be different for everyone. Like for me, I'm to the point where I don't prep much at all, but that's something I learned over time. And the more you DM, the more you're going to find what you actually need to prepare. And my roommate, well, she just moved, but she was laughing about how she would like look at my DM notes and it's just like 3 bullet points. Like I can like prepare all the assets and then be ready. But like when you're starting out, prepare everything that you can and you think it's going to be relevant. Don't be afraid to end the session if you're not ready for something. Like if the party takes a turn and like you've been playing for a couple hours, just be like, okay, well, I'm not ready for that. So let's just come back next week after I have time to prepare this. And that way you can come back to the table with a lot of confidence and make sure that everybody's still having fun instead of like stressing out about trying to make up stuff on the fly.
Boom, you were going to say something.
No, I mean I think that really kind of captures it. And in fact, that's the lesson that I had to learn starting out. Was initially I felt, and it's not because of my players. I had put the pressure on myself to deliver a kind of an experience as good as the one I had when I was introduced to the hobby, right? So my GM had been playing for like a decade, and he introduced me to the game, and I had a blast. And then when it was my turn to introduce my friends, I was like, okay, I got to be that good. And so I just crumbled under that stress, and I was not a fun GM when I started out because I was constantly trying to make it, I was trying to do exactly what Friday said, is control things that aren't really in my control. And it took like 1 or 2 attempts and then kind of taking many steps back really to kind of go, okay, I need to be having fun. If I have fun, chances are my players will have fun. And let's just communicate when we hit a block and it'll be fine. It'll be easier to do that than to kind of try to micromanage or predict the future. Never took any ranks in divination. I don't know why I tried.
I like to win on this as well. I feel like so professionally I'm in sales, and one of the things you learn pretty fucking early on is that like regardless of what you might think the dynamic is, you're the expert in the room. So to Friday's point, she'd mentioned that, you're the best GM at the table, and that's exactly right. You are, and you are the one that, and somewhat paradoxically, if you decenter yourself and make it about your players having fun, you will be an amazing GM even for your first time. And the less you make it about yourself, the better it's going to be. Because ultimately, like, it's not really about you. And your friends want you to succeed. Whoever's at your table, like, it's not going to be as adversarial as you might worry about, because 9 times out of 10 they're gonna want you to succeed. And what that means is, like, they were buying into your version of the story that's being told at the table.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, Shafak, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish that thought.
Well, I mean, also, my game count, system count is similar to Vivek's.
Oh my
but
God.
I do actually, yeah, I'm at 42 systems. And
yeah,
I
but,
only know that because I did a count recently for, like, something else. But otherwise, I was like, holy shit, I didn't realize I was there. But cool, yeah. But to that point, I also feel like wherever it's possible, try to get into systems that are not your usual bag, even for one shots at conventions like Nico would run or anything else. But, like, because when you play other games, you understand the approach to mechanization of different elements of the game. And once you know the bones of a thing, you can figure out, like, what works well for you and what doesn't really work well to stretch. And figuring out how other people mechanize things really is a really invaluable asset.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, you all gave me that same thought that, your exposure to a good GM is probably the GMs that you watch, either that you've played with them or you see them on Twitch or YouTube, and you've already, like, set a bar to somebody who's vastly more experienced. So it's a good point that you keep the pressure off by just internalizing it. Nico, I would like to hear from you. You run games at conventions. You have all these people who come and try out all these new games or new adventures, and some of them are going to go back and GM. What is that experience like? Do you get, like, do you get asked tips and advice on how to run these sessions, how to recreate the same experience that you give them at the convention so that they can go back home and give their friends the same experience?
Sometimes. More often, I run into people who GM either other games already and are like, oh, I never thought of doing something this way, or who wanted to get into that specific game and couldn't quite figure out how to. I run a lot of specifically World of Darkness when I'm at conventions. And while I adore the Chronicles of Darkness line for a lot of things, especially in some of the different books, they get very complicated. And so some people I've had be like, I wasn't sure how, like, this mechanic worked, but now that I've seen it, I know how to take that back to my table. Or I know how I want to run that in the future. And I try to give them, when I get questions, I try to give people the same kind of general advice, which is just what kind of mimicking what everyone else here said. Like, you wouldn't go into a new job and expect yourself to be perfect straight away. Like, I just started a new job and I'm still referring to, like, cheat sheets, and I'm still referring to, like, some of the kind of information sheets that I have, even though it's a job I'm familiar with, even though it's another front desk job at just a different place. It's the same with GMing. Like, you're gonna, when you're starting out, you're going to have your references and you're going to have the things that you prepare, and no one at the table is going to expect you to be perfect on the first go. Everyone there is there to have fun. So, like,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I remember when I first started, I'm an over preparer. So I poured over all the rules. I made hand-drawn maps. I drew out character portraits and, like, hand-drawn on pre-generated character sheets. It was I took a lot of pressure on myself on that, because that's how I'd seen people play, and then I realized that most of this is superficial, and just get to the meat of the game, just get to the part that my players like, and this thing. Vivek, how do you go about like identifying, like what session to run or like what experience to give to your players? Like, how do you figure that out?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think for me, it really depends on the context I'm running the game in. Sometimes when I post games on the server, it is very much this weekend I feel like playing Masks, or this weekend I feel like playing something or other, and I'm just going to pitch that. But if I'm running at a convention, or if I'm running like a few weeks ago, I was asked to run a game at a kind of summer school for kids from like disadvantaged backgrounds. I think about the kinds of people I expect to get and trying to go from there. How many of them are likely to be beginners? How many of them might not have heard of TTRPGs before? What can I assume would be a good baseline based on like Stranger Things and like other pop culture stuff? And based on that, I then try and think about the resources I'll need, because if I'm anticipating there'll be a lot of people who watch Stranger Things or Critical Role or something and they really want to play D&D, but they might be new to D&D itself, then I'll do things like download some pre-gen character sheets, or have some very quick like low-level characters mocked up. And once you've done this a few times, you'll have a library of resources that have just built up. But all of that is because like I'm doing all that now because I'm much more like practiced at GMing in these contexts. But when I first started out, I was mostly trying to figure out what I was doing and how were the kinds of games I wanted to play. And then I was very much an over preparer, because I felt like preparing sometimes was quite like satisfying for me to like come up with intricate details and scenarios. But also like for me, the reason I started GMing were twofold. Like first was a lot of my friends at the tables I used to play at told me that they thought I'd make a good GM and they wanted me to run something for them. Like literally the guy who was GMing the first campaign I played, he told me, oh, there's a convention coming up next month, I think you'd make a really good GM, come, let's go for a drink. And then he talked to me about the basics of things like safety tools and he basically taught me how to GM one-on-one like after our games. And then the funny thing is, we have a mutual friend whom I did the same thing to, and it's now turned into a nice little pyramid scheme for all friends.
So yeah, you just started like a whole
pretty
chain
much
of GMs.
Yeah. And then like pretty much. And the one thing I
would sorry, finish that thought, but I would also like other people's viewpoint on this. Like like how do you how do you figure out what kind of an experience to craft for your players?
I think one of the things that really mattered to me when I was crafting that experience is like in the UK, I was the token non-white guy in a lot of TTRPG spaces I was in, and I wanted to tell stories that reflected me and the kinds of adventures I wanted.
Preach.
So I'm like, oh, we're playing a cyberpunk game, are we? Fine, I'm going to run a game of the Sprawl set in Bangalore, because Bangalore is a cyberpunk dystopia in the present day. We don't have to imagine London 20 years from now.
I'm pretty sure you said Bangalore just because I lived there.
Oh, like I lived there for like 6 months, and yeah, it's
Bangalore.
But things. So yeah, it's about finding the kind of story you want to tell. At least that's what it was for me. That really kicked me into GMing.
I'm opening this to the floor. Like this is how do you like tailor your? How did you learn to like tailor your sessions or the experience to your players?
I think I think the more that you run games, then if you're using stars and wishes especially, then players are going to tell you like what you do well, and then you'll see trends. Like for me, it was that everyone really enjoyed my NPCs and like my role play with NPCs and the voice acting that I did, and they thought that I built tension really well for horror and high stakes combat and things like that. So now I'm a very queer horror GM, pretty much. So the things that you enjoy doing and like you get that good feedback about, like you don't have to like go very far to figure out what it is, because you might find that maybe you think that you're good at something, but you come to find out like you're better at other things, and then you can find enjoyment in that as well.
That's Shabu. You wanted to join in on that?
No, I just love the part about like you might think that you're good at this, and I that hit a note. I'm pretty sure at some point I've thought that, oh, this is my strength. I'm great at creating like maybe funny moments, and I'm like, oh no, I'm not a funny guy at all. all my games are really dark. But that's fine. Then I lean into the darkness and my players find the humor in it, and that's okay. But yeah, I think the other way for creating the kind of mood in terms of just prep wise, right? Like say the next session. I think it's about crafting, for me at least, about crafting specific scenes that can set the tone for what's to come or what's going on, right? So I often see it as, for example, I was running a Tal'Dorei campaign, and some of the listeners might know this one, but I wanted to create the sense of having your whole world shaken up, in the middle of everything and just torn apart, and now you understand that the rest of the campaign is going to be very chaotic and survival based. And obviously this had been discussed a bit beforehand in terms of session 0, but the way I did it is for about 40-50% of the session, it was just players introducing their characters, going about the day, meeting each other, kind of getting together, and your conventional how do you start a party kind of thing, right? It's just one small mystery. And then just when they thought they had a grasp on things, I had the whole city kind of torn apart to pieces and them trying to run for their lives. And just as they manage to escape, that's where the session ends, right? So for me, that particular scene of when the city gets attacked and they have to survive, that's what I built everything else around. How do I emphasize the impact of this? So that kind of worked in part of it. If there's, say, for example, now a different scene where I want to feel the emotions of it, it's good to create, say, in emotions of like a family reunion, right? It's good to create scenes that allow to set up that tone, right? Like, you're lost in a big bustling city, and then eventually, when quiet falls, you hear the familiar voice of your brother, something like that. And so
the heartstrings too.
Exactly, right. And it's also just using that contrast really helps to, and that way you can kind of go for anything. It doesn't have to be one thing or the other. Yeah.
I would like to ask though, like these are like tips and advice and shortcuts that GMs use. That we will like pull an emotional string somewhere just to challenge the player. Where did you learn all this? Question to anybody who wants to jump in.
So there are a couple of resources I found incredibly helpful for exactly this, and I was just thinking about this in following what Shubham was saying about how he plans like big set pieces that he uses. There are two games that I found were really instructive. Well, I suppose Powered by the Apocalypse as a genre is really good because the games give you things like GM moves, and that's a very useful trick of knowing how you as a GM can really set the tone and kick the action into high gear or heighten the intensity of a scene. And the more I've run different PBTA games based in different genres, I understood how to use certain kinds of things to like frame a scene in a manner that allows you to heighten the stakes or whatever you need to do in a moment. And a lot of good games that teach you that kind of scene framing. I think like Remember Tomorrow is another one of my favorites.
I have a follow-up question there. Like, has your PBT experience enhanced your other RPG experience?
Absolutely. Like the things I learned from PBTA in terms of, GM moves and stuff, and like that's a very good shorthand on how to make a scene dramatic immediately. So a PC is trying to do something. Oh, cool. Now wouldn't it be a shame if suddenly you had a very important person in the city now looking at you, and you now have an audience who's in front of whom your reputation really matters. So you learn a lot of these tricks, and one of the things I found really helpful in that regard, especially when it came to writing games, was the guide in the system Cthulhu Dark. Cthulhu Dark has this fantastic guide on how to write mysteries, which you can adapt into other genres as well. It doesn't just need to be mysteries or cosmic horror. And it basically gives you how to use imagery in an incremental manner. So it'll tell you things like, come up with an image, and then find out how you can intensify it in 3 or 5 stages. And then every session or every couple of hours in a session, if your players fail a roll or do something dramatic, use that image. So for example, you might start with, you smell something funny. And then half an hour later, you say, actually, you realize you get the smell of sulfur. And then you go for a few while later and say, okay, sulfur and like nitrate, it smells like gunpowder. And then as you keep going, you just keep building up that imagery slowly. And that drip feed can really help build intensity. And you can do that the same in like comedies as well.
You can borrow that experience or that this into
Absolutely.
like any other RPG, and you give
Absolutely.
your players like a cinematic moment, or you give like a combat a cinematic moment. It just elevates the entire experience as such, just playing
Yeah.
other RPGs. I have a question for
If I
for
could
any.
just weigh in on what Vivek had said, though, that's
Yes, yes.
I couldn't agree more, man. That's exactly what I meant when I said it. It really helps to understand how other systems mechanize different elements, because you can kind of use those concepts in your own games. So I love that you said that running these more narrative games that sort of forced you into that mindset of improv or collaboration with players or anything else, or drip feeding to get to build intensity, like all of that stuff, learning from other systems. I couldn't agree more about how invaluable it is.
I think also not
Yeah,
just
go ahead, Nico.
not just running it, but like even just reading it. Even if it's your first time GMing, you don't know what system you want to run. Picking up those books and just reading through them is part of that, and like kind of expands out into other media. Like if you don't know how to set the mood for something, watch some shows or some movies that set that mood. If you don't know how to run, like I've got a Court of Fey and Flowers on my brain right now because
Love it.
Regency is 10 out of 10. But like if you don't know how to do that kind of deal, watch Pride and Prejudice, watch Regency era films or films set in the Regency era. Watch A Court of Fey and Flowers. Like watch the stuff that you don't know how to do, and not just idly watch it, but kind of watch it with that bent of, I want to run a game. What are they doing that I can incorporate into my game? What are the things that are important to set these scenes?
Oh, fully. I've said before, and I'll say it again. Like when I started, I was watching a lot of Critical Role, and I was watching the Matt Colwell running the game series. And between the two of them, like Matt Mercer made it look easy, and Matt Colville made it sound easy. So I was like, yeah, no, I can totally do this.
That actually like leads me into like a very interesting topic that I wanted to talk about with Shane. I'm going to start with Friday. Friday, there's like this for someone who's just stepping into the hobby. There's like this huge expectation, right? Like just what Maitreyi said and what Nico said. There's already like a reference system built in that's baked into the hobby that there is this standard, and the players, they may. I mean, you don't know especially if it's like players online or strangers. You don't know if that's what they're coming in with. Their expectations may be somewhere. How do you reconcile that? Like do you take that extra pressure that if they of your players' expectations on being like a quote unquote good GM?
Yeah, so I the way that I learned to GM was totally antithetical to how most people learn how to GM, because I wasn't like around people who played D&D at the time. I just took a bunch of randoms off of Discord servers and threw them in games, and I mean, it's okay if like you do a lot of the Google Forms to like sort and filter people, but what I did really learn was that like after I was GMing when I was trying to learn, because I had my full-time job, but I was like, I want to actually like improve my craft quite a bit. I was before I started GMing on stream, I was running I think 5 games a week in my spare time. And what I found was that people are always going to have some sort of feedback, like you can do this better or that better. And then a lot of the time they don't even GM. So you're just like, okay, well, 80% of this feedback is like worthless. I'm just going to throw it in the trash here. So I think for the most part, as long as you have a full understanding of who you are and how you have fun, you're going to eventually find the people who like to have fun with you, and it's less important to take away the negative comments, because unless you're being unsafe or like you're being rude or something, like it probably doesn't matter ultimately.
Okay. I mean, this is a question that's open to all. Like, how do you deal with the expectation that players have from other GMs that they're exposed to?
Oh, yes, I'm gonna. This is a very quick. My players at the other end, and some of them are on this call. They every time I've asked them, "Hey guys, what would you like me to change or do differently, or do you have any?" They're like, "Nah, you're good." Like, and not even now you're good. Their response is satisfactory, and that's because they're my friends. They like to troll me, and they very rarely like and a lot of them don't watch any actual plays, so they are just enjoying whatever I'm presenting. I half worry that I think one of them, being Indrani, the first time I ran, so I was Indrani's first kind of like TTRPG GM, right? And I was like, and then she was playing games with like all these other cool GMs. I was like, oh no, Indrani's going to realize how bad I am. But that didn't happen. Indrani still continues to enjoy my game. So yeah, I think that worry that you're not doing well enough will stay with you, but that's more your imposter syndrome, not facts. Just ask your players, like we have discussed before. Stars and wishes is great. Use feedback like that, and then grow from that where you can. If something is very recurring, chances are maybe it's something to look into. But otherwise, you're doing fine. Don't listen to the monkey in your head.
And there's another side to like listening to your players that I'd also like to talk about, and that is just you can also tell your players what you're trying to do. So I know every time I run a game, I usually say in the pitch the style I want to run the game in. So I'll say something like, I really want to focus on the story. I'm not that keen on combat. Or if I'm running a dungeon crawl, I'll say, right, I'm just running this to be a cheesy dungeon crawl. So whatever. Like you are welcome to tell your players, especially if it's your first time GMing, or even if you're new to GMing generally, you can say, well, this is my first time GMing. I'm just trying to get the hang of the rules. So, I'd appreciate your support with some of these things. I might be rusty in some of these things. I've never tried to do voices before, or I don't like doing voices. I prefer just narrating and describing it. You can say how you honestly feel comfortable running the game. And I'm sure your players will meet you halfway there, because at the end of the day, everyone is there, not just like no one sees the GM as, someone who's there to provide you entertainment. They're there to help facilitate a table where everyone can create and collaborate and participate. So if you just honestly tell your players how you feel, that can really help managing their expectations, and it'll facilitate both you meeting each other halfway.
I have like one question to all of you. I'm going to go in this in order before I open it up to the audience for their questions. I'm going to start from the order that's there in front of me. So, Nico, the question for all of you is the same question. If you could go back in time and we revisit the past, and it's like the first time that you're ever going to like start GMing or start running a session, what would you tell yourself? Nico?
Ooh. I think the most important thing to tell past me, like if I could go back to the first time I was running, would absolutely be that like it's okay to be like, I don't know, and just look something up. Like I was so stressed about knowing every single rule and every single interaction and how mechanically they could come up the first few times that I ran, that like I was super stiff in how I was running. And like half the time I run now, if I don't know something, I will just tell my players, like, I don't know, I can either home rule it now or I can take the time to look it up. And if we're in the action, sometimes I will just say, I don't know, this is how we're doing it for this instance, and I will look that up when we have the time. And that's okay.
Happened with me exact same situation happened with me last Sunday. And yes, I didn't know a rule, and I told my players that we can either pause the combat, and they said, no, it's okay, just rule and we'll carry on. Yeah, I totally relate with that. Like the first time I DM'd, same exact situation. I froze up multiple times. And yeah, Vivek, what advice would you give yourself if you could go back?
I think the thing that for me was the most important thing was to say to myself that you are also a player at the table, and your enjoyment matters as much as everyone else's. So you are well within your right to just say no. So, if someone is taking the campaign in a direction you're not happy with, if someone is really not engaging with the spirit of the table, like I was running a Star Wars Fantasy Flight game that was, set in like the Age of Rebellion, where we were instigating a rebellion against an Imperial cell, that kind of thing. And one of the players said he wanted to play a slave trader. And I wish I'd known at the time that I could just tell him, actually, no, I know we didn't mention it explicitly in the lines and veils, but I want to draw a line around that because I am not comfortable with my players and this campaign going in a direction when you're actively enslaving people. So yeah, I unfortunately didn't have the confidence to just put my foot down then, and I wish that's something I'd gotten like better at. So yeah, if you're not happy with something, if you're not comfortable with something, you as a GM are within your right to say no. It's not just the players who get lines and veils. So do you. Your safety matters as much as everyone else's.
Yeah, that's great piece of advice for anyone who's starting out. Friday, what about you? If you could go back in time.
Yeah, so just briefly, for sure, I always have torture as my line now because I found that some parties get like torture boners, and I'm totally not into it, so I don't want to have to roleplay this this NPC who's getting like their arm chopped off or whatever. Like I was like, oh, this is not fun at all after I did that the first time. And then yeah, so I think that as far as what I would tell my past self, take more time for me because I tried to scale up like super quickly, and like I kind of did like a bit of a rubber band with like my expectations of myself, and I think giving myself a little bit more grace with how I'm developing is very important, and especially for a new GM. I'm very hypercritical of myself, which can lead to me like doing great things, but also like it doesn't mean that my mental health does well in regards to that. So I think giving yourself some more forgiveness is very important, especially while you're learning.
100%. Maitri, what about you?
You shared this question with us ahead of time, and I didn't know the answer then, and I still don't think I know the answer now. It's a great question.
Well, that's a sign that like you are and have always been like the best version of the DM that you.
Oh yeah, no, that's clearly what that means.
I think considering that you played 42 games, you have found the answer to life, and it's all done now.
Oh, that's right. I have the answer to life, the universe, and everything, and it's a D6. Turns out. What I would say to myself, I kind of started trying systems other than D&D because that was the only thing that was available to me. My first game that I did not run was Shadowrun. I wish I could tell myself that it's not intimidating to have a play experience of systems you don't know. Running systems you don't know is an entirely different beast, but like playing systems you don't know, it's kind of the same thing each. Like there are minor differences, but don't be intimidated by trying the play experiences of new systems. So I'm so sorry, my cat's just like losing her shit in the back. But
only so.
But yeah, just don't be intimidated by new play experiences, because at the very worst, it's a few hours and a story to tell. At the very best, it's something you've learned that you can take forward with you.
Absolutely. Shubham, I saved you for last because I'm pretty sure that they've all exhausted your options. So
yeah, thanks for that, Siva. Still on my server, buddy. Okay. No, in fact, I had a much simpler answer for myself, which was if I could go back, I would just tell my younger self, the younger GM, that just give your players all the toys they want. Like, don't be worried about them breaking the game. Just give them all the toys and let them try break the game, and then make them chase after the toys by, like putting something in the plot. Like, you will always have the most agency in terms of like how you can manipulate the story. So don't fret about balance. It's in games like D&D, and then I would say less crunchier games than D&D, it's fine. Just have fun. It's okay. I can't speak for more kind of crunchy games like Lancer and stuff, perhaps. But I would say, yeah, for everything else, just Give it to them. Don't worry about balance. Balance, I think, is overrated when it comes to having fun at a table.
Okay, that was great. I loved hearing from all of you. We do have a few audience questions, so if you don't mind, I'll just read out the questions, and then I'm keeping it open to the panel. Anyone can jump in and offer their thoughts on this. So, yeah, the first question is, how do you start DMing a new game system, and how do you convince your existing players to switch with you? Or would you prefer to go separate and find other people who are interested in that system so that you can DM for them?
I'm gonna
go for it, Matt.
sorry, Vivek. Please go ahead.
I think one thing that we talked about when 8-Bit ran in his workshop last week was it's important to find the game that your players want to play rather than try and hack something, rather than try and force your group to play something they're not interested in. And for me, that meant just having an honest conversation and shopping around for people to find the right group. It's not always easy. Like sometimes you find groups that are incompatible with the thing you're actually wanting to play. But in the long run, it's better you find the game that suits the group, and so that everyone has that buy-in. And getting that buy-in can be really challenging sometimes. So it might be a little bit of persuading people, giving them the elevator pitch, trying to draw comparisons with pop culture properties that they might identify with, err on the side of picking the game for the group rather than forcing the group to play the game that they don't want to play.
I mean, that's a great answer. I'm going to just open it up to anybody else. I'll start with you. How do you decide which game you want to play? How do you decide which system you want to play? There are so many options out there. What is your deciding factor?
I'm gonna start with plugging my YouTube for a hot second, because I actually just made a video about this 3 weeks ago about how to get your players to try something other than D&D. So I will put that in links and promos after today's chat. That's one. The other thing is that there's two ways to go about it. Either you can try and get your existing group to try a new system, or you can try and find a group that sort of is familiar with the system already, loves the system, knows the system, and wants to play in that system. That second one is actually much easier. And the way to go about doing that is, and for this one, you can pretty much do any system. There's really no caveats on you really should just pick a system that works for you. And the easiest way to get a game going is to find content creators around that system, or if that system has an official Discord, join that. But those I have not had good luck with official product Discords. I've had much better luck with communities that are built around content creators and concepts. So, find a podcast you like, find a YouTube channel or a Twitch channel that you like, and join their Discord. 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a looking for group channel, and you can participate there. So super easy to find a group that is already into the system, whatever system you want to play. That's one. The second thing, to get your own game, if you have a regular home group, that one's a little bit more challenging, because the reality is, if you are listening to this and if you're on this panel, you are probably more into tabletops than the average person, and probably more than all of your friends. And what might be just one of several games for you might be the only game for everybody else at the table. And especially if they're adults and they have kids and they have work and whatever the hell else, they have it in their head that they have an expectation of how they're going to spend these 4 hours. It might be one of the few times they get to hang out with their adult friends, once every week or 2 weeks or whatever. And it's challenging for them to go to something they're unfamiliar with and that they might not have a good time with. So my
Absolutely.
recommendation is to
Yeah.
do a one-shot of a system and a setting that is adjacent to what they already know. So if you're playing a really narrative-heavy system like PBTA, go for Blades in the Dark. If you're playing something like D&D, go for a DCC that has modifiers and is set in that and has a traditional.
Yeah, familiarity always brings up like
Exactly. It's like super unsexy to say, but system familiarity is probably the biggest thing.
Nico and Friday. Like one thing I wanted to ask you was when you first started GMing, were you comfortable asking your players for help with the rules and like to assist you? Were you like uncomfortable? Were you like hesitant to ask? Like how did you deal with that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was because I was my first like few players I think were people that I had played with previously, but I was just a player alongside them. So I purposefully invited one or two more experienced players than me to sort of coach me a little bit on the side while I was running, and they would give me their opinion. And that's like an important, I think, step for a lot of GMs where you actually kind of pinpoint whose advice that you take. And eventually, maybe if you grow and you find that you're doing this full time, you only listen to your mentor after a certain point. Like, for instance, like I listen to like Dot and Jasmine. Who else is going to tell me something that's like relevant? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll ask Jasmine for advice on stuff, but like generally, I've already kind of found my style and what I like to do. But when you're starting out, don't be afraid to ask for people's opinions that you're playing with if they have more experience than you. And it's good as a growth thing, but at a certain time, like you do have to understand that not all advice is good advice.
Absolutely. Nico, what about you? Were you hesitant to ask players for advice when you first started running session?
I used to straight up. I had, especially when I first started running, major social anxiety. So I just straight up didn't. And I fully regret that. Thankfully, by the time I started going from kind of quasi-public private, they were club games, into convention GMing, my first time running there, I had run for a table that was like, it was a 5-person table. 4 of them were people that I had run for before and that I knew very well. And like, we did a lot of stuff together. And then 1 was someone that I didn't know at all. And he came up to me afterwards and was like, you seem new. Can I offer some advice? And I'm glad that I said yes, because he gave me some very good advice. And I found out later that he actually was a designer himself. And so I had reached out to him later when I was working on other things and was like, hey, I need some advice. You gave me great advice this first time. Would you be willing to give advice again? So like, it's definitely worth getting that advice. I did not, because my anxiety got the best of me for a while.
100% relate to that, yeah. Shubham, you want to jump into this? And I think
I think everyone's covered everything I could have possibly said. So yeah, I'm good. I'm not going to add more to that.
There is there is one thing I can just add to this. Like, one thing that I found really helped me get over this social anxiety that I struggled with at the start was, like early on, I used to ask some of my closest friends to like join some of the games I was running, just so I had at least 1 or 2 people whom I trusted to be there like constantly. And that made the world of difference, because that was like, those were people whom I trusted. And then over time, there were more people whom I became friends with who would, come and go and join some of the games I was in. And building that trust with like people around you can really make a world of difference for your confidence when you're starting out. And then when you start going into environments with like strangers and different people, then that's because you've already got that experience under your belt of all those times you played with your friends, you find yourself much more at home there. But when you're starting out, it can really help to have a handful of people you trust backing you up. Because, like Maitri said at the start, like, your players want you to succeed, but your friends are more likely to put in that extra effort to lift you up in those situations and help you deal with that stress. So that really helped me when I was starting out.
Absolutely. I think with that we will end this session. We're right on time. We started a little late because of tech difficulties, but thank you all for joining. Thank you all the participants who are here. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for participating on chat. And we will keep recording of this session available on publicly available platforms, and it will also be available. A link will be provided in the chat channel. Those who couldn't attend the session today, or those who couldn't watch the session live, the recording will be made available to them. So they might have some additional questions and some follow-up, which will be posted on the associated chat channel. But thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure talking to all of you. You're all amazing DMs in your own right, and it was such a pleasure to hear from you, hear your processes, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be picking your brains very often on this.
You're a great moderator, dude. Thank you for facilitating.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's going to say exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to your community. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I loved having you here.